So congratulations on making it to the end of section 7 of the complete Android N developer course. Now that we've covered both web views and SQL data storage, we're going to put that knowledge in action by making a completely offline newsreader app. And the app looks like this. So we're downloading some news items. I'll show you where we're going to get those from in a minute. And then when we tap any of those news items, and then when we tap one of those news items, it displays the website and would display the HTML content completely offline. So that's the idea. The app that we're going to build could really be used with pretty much any news website, but we're going to be using a site called Hacker News, which is a site that I read quite frequently, and I'd thoroughly recommend you as a developer checking it out. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there, but particularly usefully, it has a really nice API, which is something that we know how to work with now. So if you just do a quick Google for Hacker News API, you should get all the details that you need. All right, that's pretty much it. So back over to Android Studio. We're recreating the Hacker News offline newsreader app. Best of luck. Off you go. All right, I hope that went well. I'll kick off by starting a new project for my newsreader app. Usual settings, empty activity to begin with, and off we go. While that's loading up, I'll look in a bit more detail at the Hacker News API and work out where we need to begin. So you can see we can access an item via its ID at a URL like that. Where we need to start is with a list of all the recent articles. So let's see if we can scroll down and find one of those. And here we go. So this link here gives us the top stories. Let's open that in a new tab and just take a look. And there we go. It's not particularly interesting, but a set of IDs gives us the top stories. And then once we've got those items, to get the details of the items, if we scroll up, here we go. It looks like this link should do the job for us. So that has all the details of the item that we need. Specifically, the title and URL are going to be the ones that we're really interested in. All right, so now we've got the basic idea, hopefully, of how the app is going to work. Let's start off by creating our list view for our titles. So I'll get rid of the text view, and down in containers, we'll drag in our list view. And for this one, I'm going to go full screen. So I'm going to get rid of any padding in the flexible layout there. Definitely a matter of personal taste, but I think it often looks better to have that going right to the edge of the screen. Okay, and then we'll add an ID of list view. All right, back over to main activity, and I'll just run the app in the background again. And then we'll do our usual process to create our list view. So we're going to find it by its ID, resources.id.listView, and of course we'll cast that as a list view. And then we'll need an array list of strings for our titles. There we go, just the one string there. So I'll define it up there, as I'm sure we'll need to use it in several locations. Similarly with our array adapter. I'll define it there and then set it up here. So this is going to be a new array adapter using this, i.e. main activity, and android.r.layout.simpleListItem1 as the layout structure, and then titles as the linked array list. And then we take our list view and we set that array adapter to it. All right, next we're going to set up the process of downloading the content. So before I forget, I'm going to add the permission for internet to our manifest. And then we're going to download the contents of this URL here. So I'll just copy that. I will need it shortly. So hopefully you can remember how to do this. We first set up our download task. So this is going to be a public class called download task, which is going to extend async task with a string. We're not going to return anything. And then a second string. And then we'll get Android Studio to implement the one required method doing background. And then we'll write our code to get the contents of this URL. So for that, we'll need to set up a string, which we'll call result, which will initially be an empty string. We'll have a URL called URL, which we'll use later on. And then we have our HTTP URL connection called URL connection, which initially will be null. Then we're going to take our URL, which we're going to create using the URL method from this variable here, strings 0. And that will be the URL that's passed to the download task class. And of course that might fail, so we need to surround it with try and catch. Assuming that works, we'll take our URL connection and we'll open a connection from our URL. As before, we'll need to cast that to an HTTP URL connection. And there are some specific ways in which that could fail, so we're going to add catch clauses for those, specifically the IO exception there. Then we take our input stream, call it IN, and we use URL connection and we get an input stream from it. Then we take our input stream reader and we create an input stream reader called reader, which is going to be a new input stream reader based on our input stream in. Next, we create a data integer, which we're going to use to loop through the reader. And we keep going as long as data is not equal to -1. There we go. And then we create a character called current to represent the current character that's being read. And this, we're going to take our data variable and cast it to a character. Then we take our result string and append the current character to it. And then finally, in this part, we update our data variable to read the next character. And then finally, for now, we're just going to log URL content and log the result of that process. And then to run the task, we go back over to our onCreate method and we create a download task, which we'll call task, which is going to be a new download task. And then we're going to take our task and execute it with the URL that I copied earlier, which should give us all the ID numbers of the top stories. And we'll just surround that with a try and catch as well. Just in case we have any problems. And we'll just do a print stack trace if that does go wrong. All right, so let's give this a try. Hopefully that brings back to you the process of downloading content from the web. A little bit more arduous than we'd want maybe, but it gets the job done. Let's take a look. And there it is. So we've got our URL content, and those are our lovely numbers displayed for us. Right, so next task is to take those numbers and convert them into a form that we can use to extract the individual IDs. So that should be pretty straightforward. We just need to create a JSON array, which I'll call JSON array. And this is going to be a new JSON array based on the result string. And we'll need to add a catch clause for that because it's possible that something could go wrong with the JSON process. All right, and then we're just going to loop through the JSON array. So we'll do a simple for loop with an int I counter variable that starts at 0, keeps on going as long as it's less than the length of the JSON array, and it increments by 1 each time. And then temporarily we'll just log JSON item and JSON array get string I. All right, so that should now separate out all the numbers in the JSON array, and there we go. You can see they're all returned at the bottom there. Wonderful. Now there's probably more there than we need. So I'm going to limit this to 20 items by setting number of items to be 20. And then we're going to go up to number of items in our list. There's a chance though, of course, that for some reason the API won't return 20 items and we don't want our app to crash in that situation. So we'll do a check to see if JSON array dot length is less than 20, then number of items will equal JSON array dot length. All right, so I'm going to get rid of these logs for now. Now that we've got all the ID numbers of the items that we're interested in, we're going to load these URLs here. So to do that, we'll need this URL. So let's create a URL from it. This is going to be a new URL based on that URL there. But of course, we want to replace the ID here with the article ID that we want. So let's create a string called article ID, which is going to be JSON array.get string I. And then we can use that in here. To get the details of our current article. And because we're still in our try catch loop, we've got the necessary catches there. All right, so now we set up everything again. So URL connection is HTTP URL connection, and we get that from URL.open connection. We set up our input stream again. So URL connection.get input stream. We set up our reader. To be a new input stream reader based on our input stream. We set up our data variable to read the content. And we're going to have a string which I'll call article info, which will initially be empty, and then we'll loop through using the same process as before. So as long as data is not -1, we'll create a character called current, which is cast to a character from the data variable, and then article info is going to be appended with the current character. And then we carry on the process using data is reader.read. All right, so that should give us the article content. So now, again, time to do a quick log. Article info. Right, article info. All right, so let's give that a try. Now we should get the article info, i.e. something that looks like this for all of the articles. When we've got that, of course, we're going to extract the necessary information that we need, so specifically title and URL, and we might save the ID as well. So let's have a look. Scroll down, and there we go. Excellent. So that's all the data that we need in our nice JSON format. So now let's extract what we need. This time what we've got is a little bit more complicated than just a list of numbers. So we're going to need a JSON object, which I'll call JSON object, and this is going to be a new JSON object from article info. And as I mentioned, the two bits that we're particularly interested in are title and URL. So let's, for now, just print both of those. I'll create an article title string. It's going to be JSON object.get string title, and article URL, which is going to be JSON object.get string URL. So we're checking title and URL against the names here. So yep, URL and title. So we could jump straight onto the next one, but I think it's always a good idea to print things as you go. It doesn't take long, and it could save you a lot of time further on down the line. While that's compiling, it's a good idea to think about what is going to come next. So now that we've got the article title and the article URL, the final bit of data from the web that we're going to need to get is the article content, which we'll get, of course, from the article URL. So let's just make sure that that info data is working. And now we've got an interesting result here that for one of our articles, it would appear that there is no value for the URL. So let's have a quick bit of investigation and see what's going on there. So I'm going to log the JSON object itself and rerun the app and see if that's the case. And if it is, as looks likely, we'll need to put in some manual checks for a URL not existing, which is a good idea anyway. Notice that because we're inside a try-catch loop, it won't crash our app if there's no URL, but it will cause an exception, so none of this will run. So if there's a single article with either no title or no URL or no ID or something like that, it will stop our app from getting any information until that article is no longer in the top 20. So you can see we're getting the info fine here, and it is extracting the data that we need for most of them. But let's have a look at the last one. So this one here, you can see it's got a lot more children than most, and a big long title as well. And it doesn't appear to have a URL. Okay, so that's always a good lesson to learn, not to trust the API that you're working with. It won't always provide you with the data that you are expecting. So as always, there's a number of ways to check for this. I'm going to show you one called isNull. So we can use if JSON object dot isNull and then title, and that will be called if either the title doesn't exist or if the title's null. Now we want to check for that not to be the case, so I'll put an exclamation mark in front of it. So we're now checking that the title exists and is not null. So I'll do a similar check for the URL. And then we'll move these lines of code into that if statement. So now if we check again, we should get all of the news items that have a title and a URL, and the one that doesn't have a URL just won't be returned. So let's have a look. There we go. So now we've got all our info from our top 20 news items. Excellent. So as we've said, the final thing is to get the article data itself. Now this time I want to use exactly the same code as what we've got here. So I'm going to copy that down and just change what I need. So we're going to create a new URL from article URL. And then we're going to go through that process of getting the content, and I'll call this article content. And finally then, we'll log what we need, which will be the article content. So let's just have a quick look. We should now have the HTML of a lot of different pages in our logs. Let's take a look. And you can see here that it is getting the data, but it's just too much data to be displayed in the logs. So instead, what I'll do is go straight to saving this data in our SQL database. Now the database will need to be accessed from a number of places, so we'll define it up here. And I'll call it articles DB. And then we'll set it up down here before the download task. So articles DB, we're going to use this .open or create database. And we'll call it articles. It's going to be private mode and null. And then, if it's the first time that we've run it, we'll need to create a table in it for our data. So we'll use articles.db.exec SQL. And then, here we go with a bit of SQL. We want to create a table if it doesn't exist. And the table will be called articles. And we're going to have an ID, as we have in all our SQL tables, which will be an integer. And it will also be the primary key. We'll save the article ID, which will be an integer. We'll save the title, which will be a varchar. And we'll save the content, which will also be a varchar. Okay, so now we have the table. Let's add our articles to it. So this time I'll need to create my SQL as a string, and then we'll add the variables in afterwards. So we're going to insert into the articles table, and we'll leave the ID to be created automatically. The article ID we're going to add ourselves, as well as the title and the content. And we've got values 1, 2, 3. I'll just pop in an extra space there, spread them out. There we go. And then we take our SQLite statement class and set up a statement. And we're going to do that via articles.db.compile statement. And the statement is, of course, that SQL string I've just created. And then we take our statement and we bind a string to it. And the first one is that one there. So that's the article ID, which we've got saved in article ID. We've then got number 2 is going to be the title, which we've got saved in fact, it's not title, it's article title. And number 3 is the content, which we've got saved in article content there. Great, and then we take our statement and we execute it. Okay, so that's all looking good. Bear in mind that this is just going to add it to the table. So I'm going to add an instruction here to clear the table before we add any new data, because we don't want it adding the same thing over and over again. So articles.db exec SQL, and then simply delete from articles. So that will clear everything and add our new data in there. All right, so we're close. We just need to write some code to update the list view when we're ready to go. Now we're going to want to call that from the onCreate method, and also we're going to want to call it again when our article downloading process has completed. So I'm going to define it as a method here. I'll call it update list view. So here we're going to want to get the data from the database and display the titles to the user. So let's start by creating a cursor C, which we're going to get from a simple articles DB query. Select everything from articles. We'll add our null in there as well. Then we need to create our indexes. So we'll have a content index, which is going to be c.get column index content, and then title index, which will be c.get column index title. And then we're going to check to see if we have an initial value, i.e. if the database returns anything. And if it does, we'll clear our titles array list. And we'll also need a content array list to store our content. So let's just add that in. There we go. So we'll clear the content array list as well. And then we'll do a do while loop. And the thing that we want to do is add the current title to our titles array list. So we get that with c.getString, and then title index, and then same thing with content, c.getString content index, and we keep doing that as long as we can go to the next item. So c.move to next. And then we just update the array adapter, telling it that the dataset has changed. Now we're going to want to run this from two locations. We'll update the list view there in the onCreate method, and then we also want to do it down here. So we'll do that by using the onPostExecute method, which you'll remember is run when the process in the download task is completed. And so here we'll just update the list view. And here we go. Now that did take a fair while, a few minutes on my simulator here. It should be much quicker on a real device. And now then we have all our titles, which is great. Let's check and make sure that they are indeed stored permanently. So we'll just comment out the executed task there and restart the app. And that should then save all of the titles and of course all of the content as well within the app. And there we go. Just to make absolutely sure, we'll shut down the app, load it up again, and all the data is there. Wonderful. So now all that remains is adding the second activity, which will display the article itself for the user. So let's do that. So File, New Activity. And we'll just go for the usual empty activity. I'll call this article activity. And then we'll add in our web view. Here we go. And we'll give it an ID of WebView. And then we'll add in the code to set it up. So let's create our WebView. Call it WebView. It will be cast as a WebView, and we'll get it using findView by ID, r.id.webview. Then we'll add in the settings that I mentioned last time. So get settings, and then set JavaScript enabled to be true. And we'll also set the WebView client as a new WebView client. And then we need to know which item was tapped on to display it. So let's go back over to main activity. And then here in our list view, we'll set an on item click listener with a new adapter view on item click listener. And then, as we're now hopefully familiar with, we'll create an intent, which will be a new intent with the context of get application context. And we want to jump to article activity class, and we want to pass an extra, and this is going to be called content, and we want to pass content.get, and then the position that we're interested in is I, which will be the one that the user tapped on. All right, then we'll start that activity. And then finally, we can jump to article activity. And then again, we'll create an intent for which we'll use get intent. And then we'll use WebView.load data. And then the string is going to be intent.get string extra. And the string we want to get is content. And then we'll just add the format, so text HTML, and the character encoding, so UTF-8. Oops, and that should be a slash. All right, let's give it a try. So we should now be able to tap on those items and view the article within the app in that web view. Let's take a look. And there we go. So there's our article content displaying very nicely in our web view. Worth bearing in mind that it looks so nice because we're online, so it's getting the styles and images as well. If we were offline, then would only be displaying the HTML, so we'd get the content, but it wouldn't likely look as good. But there we go. That's what we were after. And that takes us to the end of section 7 of the complete Android N developer course. So you're now hopefully confident and competent with using both shared preferences and SQL databases to store your users' data offline, as well as becoming familiar with web views, alert dialogues, and menus, and of course having built 2 pretty big apps, the newsreader and our note-taking app. Time to move on now, and we're going to start building our first social app using self-hosted Parse server, and that is Instagram, and we'll be building that in the next section. I'll see you there.